Hi everybody! Welcome to my first ever episode of Dinner a la Donna. Today I want to talk to you about my first recipe that I ever perfected and made my own, and it's Julia Child's French onion soup. So I'm going to take you through the steps of how easy it is to make and how you can make it your own. Here are the ingredients you'll need to make Julia Child's French onion soup. It may look like a lot of ingredients, but all of this, or most of it, you should probably have in your house. So what we're looking at here is 3 large yellow onions chopped, 1 white onion chopped, and I added in 1 shallot chopped because I think the flavor is more rich and it brings something to it. If you don't have it or can't find it, you don't really need it. 2 tablespoons of flour. This is 3 cubes of beef bouillon dissolved in 2 cups boiling hot water. This is 2 beef broths, any brand will do, 32 ounces. You'll need some olive oil, white sugar, ground black pepper, salt. I use any salt I have in the house, so don't fret if you don't have kosher salt on hand. A little bit of ground thyme, a stick of butter, this beautiful day-old baguette, and some Gruyere cheese. But that comes at a later time. First, we assemble the soup. Okay, so this is my 6-quart Dutch oven. I'm using it because it's the largest pot that I have and it heats really well, but you use whatever you have. I'm adding my onions right in. Hearty shaking of salt, hearty shaking of pepper, and sugar. Sugar makes the onions caramelize really well, so don't freak out that you're using a lot of sugar. You're just using it to brown those onions and get them nice and gummy. A splash of olive oil. Now how much olive oil and butter you use will depend on how many onions you use. The soup that I'm making today will serve about 4 people, 2 servings apiece. Certainly you can make this smaller or larger. I'm going to use about a half a stick of salted butter. You could use salted or unsalted. I'm using what I have. Right in. And I'm going to put my heat on medium-high, stir it all around, and watch. If I feel like it needs more butter, I will certainly add it. If not, I'm just going to let these babies cook on medium-high heat, stirring occasionally for about 30 minutes until they're nice and brown. Okay, so I have turned my burner on, and I'm just sort of giving my onions a little bit of a toss to see. So what you want to watch out for is burning your onions. And now I know I told you they're going to cook for about 30 minutes on medium-high, but if you start to see a lot of char and not a lot of moisture in them and not a lot of liquid from the butter, then you need to do 2 things. Slightly lower your heat and slowly add in about a tablespoon of butter. As the butter melts, it sort of bubbles and froths, and that's all fine. Even if it looks a little brown, that's perfect. But it depends on how many onions you have and how big the pot is and all those kinds of things. But it's very easy to just watch, stir occasionally, and let it take its course. It's the butter and the sugar that are caramelizing your onions. And once you get the hang of caramelizing onions really beautifully, it's so easy to make them for other dishes. This is how I've learned how to caramelize my onions, and I put them literally in everything, on top of burgers and homemade onion dip, everything. So don't be intimidated, just take it as it goes. And there's nothing that you can't correct. There's no mistake you can make that will ruin your soup. And once your onions are perfect, then we're just adding liquid, a little bit of seasoning, and basically just watching it boil. So this is about 40 minutes and what my onions look like. You see that it looks like it charred a little bit on the bottom. It scrapes right off because of the butter, and that's exactly what you're looking for. I ended up adding the rest of my stick of butter because I had a lot of onions and I wanted it to achieve this look. You know, when you read instructions on how to cook something, it always says, wait till your onions look translucent. I never knew what that meant until now. This is what it looks like. They're wet, but they sort of look sticky and apparently translucent. So now this is the base of our soup, so that's why we wanted to really make sure that we caramelized our onions and make sure that they taste really good. Next, to sort of thicken our soup, we're going to add flour. Now, before I said 2 tablespoons, but it really depends on how many onions you have. There's a real simple way to figure out what you need to do. So I usually add 1 tablespoon. I spin it around, toss it. You want the flour to really coat the onions. And this came from a lot of practice figuring out what that looks like, because there were times when my onions were still very wet, and then there were times where I added too much flour and they were dry. So you sort of want to just take it as it goes and see what they look like. Now you see how they're drying up a little, not completely. We don't want them too dry, but just like that. I always say they look gummy to me because that's what they sort of look like, sticky and perfect. And now you're going to let this cook about a minute or two on low heat, and then we're going to add all of our broth. Okay, so now that I've added flour to my onions, I'm going to give them a little stir. As you can see, I've already added my beef bouillon that I had made the other day. And you just want to sort of scrape lightly to make sure your onions aren't sticking. And now we're going to add our 2 containers of 32-ounce beef broth. I call it stock, broth, it's all the same. Okay, so all of my liquid is in, giving it a good stir, going back and forth, making sure all my onions are not stuck to the bottom. And now we're going to readjust our seasoning. So what I like to do is add a little shake of salt, pepper. My beef broth is unsalted, but you can use whatever you find in the store. And now this part's not really part of Julia's recipe, but I like a little earthiness. So I use a little sprinkle of ground thyme, not too much. And I also am going to use a little bit of ground parsley. I just shake some into the cap that it came in, sprinkle it like so. And now I'm going to stir and cook my broth. I'm going to cook it on low to medium heat for about 45 minutes, stirring occasionally. Okay, so now that my liquid is going to come to a boil about 30-40 minutes, I have a lid on it. I also wanted to mention that you can use any type of flour, gluten-free, to thicken your soup as well. What you're looking at here is that French baguette. I've sliced it into, some are thicker than others, basically as thick as I felt. What I'm going to do now is put a little bit of olive oil. I have a paper dish because it's easier to clean, and some garlic powder. So I really like garlic powder. And mix it in here, and I'm going to baste, or just basically cover each piece of bread like so. And then this is the cheese that I grated over here. It's Gruyere. You can use white cheddar, you can use baby Swiss, whatever you find, whatever you like, and just put it on top. This baking sheet has been sprayed with olive oil. When the soup has about 10 minutes left on it, I'm going to preheat my oven to 350 and bake these just until the cheese melts. You can use day-old bread, it actually toasts better. And if you don't have baguette, use whatever bread that you like. Julia Child's recipe, I guess, is the more authentic French recipe. So when you go into a restaurant, normally you get that bowl in front of you with that big blob of cheese on top, but not so much inside. This sort of makes like a crouton so that there's a crunch and a piece of cheese in every bite. It also is really handy when you want to make leftovers. Keep the soup and these pieces of bread stored separately in your refrigerator, and then just reheat your soup and reheat however many pieces of bread you want, and it'll be just as good as fresh. This was a big block of Gruyere. Honestly, I bought it because it's hard for me to find Gruyere in my local supermarket. I'm going to end up grating the entire block. I'm not going to use it all. I'm going to cover the bread that I have. I'm going to take about a good handful, and the last 10 minutes or so when I put the bread into the oven, I'm going to take that handful of cheese and stick it in my soup. The rest I'm going to store in a Ziploc bag and use for scrambled eggs or any other recipe that comes along during the week. Okay, so my broth has been cooking for about 30 minutes. You see it's starting to boil, covered. I wanted to also add that when you add the broth, if you like, you can include half a cup rather, of dry white wine, like a Pinot Grigio. I usually buy whatever I find in the grocery store, nothing super expensive. A little bit of acid and a little bit of sweetness, if you like. So now that I'm at the halfway point, well, more than halfway, almost done, I'm going to add that handful or so of grated Gruyere. You can omit this part if you would like. And then I'm going to actually stir this in, let it cook another 10 minutes, and then I'm going to do a taste test. Emeril Lagasse always says that you should taste your food before you're finished cooking and before you serve it. So at that point, you can adjust for seasoning if you feel like it needs more pepper, salt, whatever you like. But this is going to boil for another 10 minutes. I'm going to put my bread in the oven right now, and then we're going to be ready to eat. Okay, as you can see, I just took my bread out of the oven. It's all nice and toasty. Now I'm going to show you how beautiful it is once you plate it. Ladle in so much. Just a little bit more. smells so good. And then just pick your prettiest pieces. Don't worry about the cheese that looks like it's stuck. It'll scrub right off because we had sprayed our pan. And that's it. Enjoy.